Yo guys, so before we get started, I just want to say that as of this day, I'm going to be changing my name on all of my social media. So YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, anything that you can find me on, I'm going to be changing my name from AJ the Right Gamer to AJ Dubs 03. I just feel like since I don't do much gaming on this channel anymore, then the gamer part doesn't really fit, and I just wanted to synchronize all of my channels and everything that's associated with this property, this basketball channel, with myself. So I'm just going to be keeping it as AJ Dubs 03. But that's pretty much just a little update for you guys, but let's get straight into the topic. Yo, what is up guys? AJ Dubs 03. It's been a minute, but I'm back with another video, and today we are going to be talking about the NBA play-in tournament and playoff bracket that I have for the 2021 NBA playoffs. The playoffs are like coming up. The play-in tournament is, I believe, on Saturday, if I'm remembering correctly. And I just wanted to do a little bit of a freeform, not much editing. Just wanted to get into what I think the playoffs are going to turn out like and who I think is going to win the championship. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. One more quick thing before I start off. I'm going to be assuming that LeBron and the Lakers are not at full strength because it seems that LeBron has re-aggravated something in his ankle and he's either going to be out or I'm assuming not at full strength. If they were at full strength, just disclaimer, they would be my pick to make the finals and win the championship. But since they are not, I'm going to assume that they are not at least, so this is going to be taking that into account. But I'm going to start off with the play-in tournament results in the Western Conference. At 7 and 8, we have the Los Angeles Lakers and the Golden State Warriors. And in my opinion, since the Los Angeles Lakers won't be at full strength, at least I don't think they will be, I'm going to pick the Lakers to win that matchup because obviously the Warriors have the best player in the series with LeBron out and Steph Curry, and he's absolutely explosive, and I'm sure he's going to go off for at least 35 points. And he's Draymond Green, Wiggins, I'm sure they're going to all have good games. And with the Lakers without LeBron, although they've maintained a great defense with liabilities like Andre Drummond and Montrezl Harrell at the center, and them just not having arguably the best player in the league, I just don't think they're going to pull it out. So I'm going to have the Warriors getting the 7th seed and going up against the Suns in the first round. As far as the 9-10 matchup, Grizzlies versus Spurs, I'm going to pick the Grizzlies on that one, because I just think they're a much better team than the Spurs. Don't get me wrong, the Spurs have some good pieces. Of course, they have DeMar DeRozan, who's very underrated, has had a great year. DeJounte Murray has stepped it up. Keldon Johnson has been great. But in my opinion, the Grizzlies just have a much better team. And with Jaren Jackson Jr. coming back, being the defensive anchor and being a sniper from 3, shooting 40% in the past couple years. And he's looked pretty decent coming back, so I don't think he'll be really hampered by the injury, although he might be on a slight minutes restriction. I think that the Grizzlies are going to win that and take the San Antonio Spurs out of playoff contention. And then for the 8th seed, the game will be Grizzlies versus Lakers. And even if LeBron is not there, or even if he's not at full strength, I'm going to pick the Lakers to take the 8th seed because I just feel like Anthony Davis is going to be the clear best player in the series. He's a superstar, and the Grizzlies don't have anyone to match up like that. So purely off of that superstar power, I think that's enough to put the Lakers over the Grizzlies for the 8th seed. But also the Lakers still have a great defense. They still have someone in Kyle Kuzma who, although inconsistent on the offensive end, could go off for a good game. They have someone like a Dennis Schroeder or Montrezl Harrell who won't be as much of a liability against the Grizzlies. Maybe he will because Ja Morant will be driving inside, but at the same time, it's just not as good of an offensive team as a team like the Warriors because of Steph Curry and those good role players that they have. So I'm going to pick Lakers for the 8th seed and the Golden State Warriors for the 7th seed. So now that all of the play-in stuff is out of the way, let's get into the actual playoffs matchups. Starting with the 1 seed versus the 8th seed, which is the Jazz versus the Lakers, in my opinion. Now, assuming that LeBron is either not at full strength or is not in the actual playoff series, I'm going to go with the Jazz in about 5 or 6 games. Even though Anthony Davis has shown that he can be a great playoff performer and he can take bigs like Rudy Gobert out of like his impact, out of his element, and make his impact a lot lesser. The Jazz just simply, without LeBron on the Lakers, the Jazz just simply have a much better all-around team. The Lakers don't necessarily have as much depth, especially at the center position, where guys like Andre Drummond and Montrezl Harrell will probably not get that many minutes compared to Marc Gasol, just because of their skill set just not being good for the playoffs and them not being great assets overall, in my opinion. Montrezl Harrell was taken out of the playoffs last year, and Andre Drummond hasn't been good since maybe like 2015, and even then it was questionable. So in my opinion, the Jazz are going to win this with another great performance from Donovan Mitchell. He has shown that he can be an absolutely great playoff performer, besides that one series against the Rockets, but he was pretty much outmatched. But I'm going to go with the Jazz in about 5 or 6 games. Moving on to the 2-7 matchup in the West, we have the Phoenix Suns versus the Golden State Warriors. And although I do believe that the Golden State Warriors can give some teams a run for their money and maybe even upset some teams, I'm not going to pick them to win the series. I'm going to pick the Suns in about 6 or 7 games, because although Steph Curry is probably going to go off, Draymond Green is probably going to have a very good series, and we'll see with Wiggins, I'm not going to bet on these role players to beat a contending team. And I feel like it's very possible. I feel like they could, because Juan Toscano-Anderson has been great. Jordan Poole has been great. Eric Pascal has been pretty good, and when he's played at least. And Kent Bazemore can be hit or miss, but he can be very good. Chris Paul and Devin Booker, they both translate very well to the playoffs. We've seen it in Chris Paul. We haven't seen it in Devin Booker, but I think it'll translate very well. DeAndre Ayton has the potential to get taken out of the series, but they also have other pieces to where they can run a smaller lineup. People like Cameron Johnson, like Jay Crowder. They have Cameron Payne off the bench, who's a very good backup point guard. And overall, their team construction is just a lot better. So I'm going to pick them to win this series, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Warriors took it to 6 or 7, and I wouldn't be surprised if they won this series. I will only be a little surprised if the Warriors moved on to the second round. But for right now, I'm going to take the Suns in about 6 or 7 games. Next, we're going to talk about the 3-6 matchup, Nuggets versus Blazers. For this one, this is probably the most simple one for me. I'm going to pick the Nuggets in 5 games. I feel like Dame could still win, but I just feel like the Nuggets are an all-around better team, even without Jamal Murray. Damian Lillard is a notoriously overrated and average playoff performer. If you look back, he only has a couple of good series, and the people that the ones that people remember, the Thunder series and the Rocket series, both where he hit walk-off game winners, are 2 of his best series, and I will say that he played great in those series, but I feel like the memories of those series has overrated him as a playoff performer, because historically he's not very good. CJ is a good playoff performer, and we'll see about Norman Powell in this increased role. Nikola Jokic is obviously going to bring it. And even without Jamal Murray, they still have someone like Michael Porter Jr., who has been absolutely insane. And I think his game will translate well to the playoffs in this increased role. Aaron Gordon is still going to be great. Paul Millsap is still going to do his thing. Will Barton, he can be hit or miss, but I think he'll be all right. Monte Morris can still do his thing. Their new rookie that they have, I think he's pretty good. I think he'll be fine in the playoffs. And I just feel like they're just a much better team, especially with Nurkic being as hit or miss as he is with his injury problems. I don't know how that's going to turn out. So I'm going to pick the Nuggets in about 5 games. This is pretty much the simplest series to predict, at least in the West. And last but not least, for the Western Conference, I want to talk about the 4-5 matchup, which is Clippers versus Mavericks. Now, this one is interesting because there's a lot of variables, because you don't know what you're going to get out of someone like a Paul George, although I do think he'll be much better this year with his increased role and his bigger ball handling duties. I feel like he'll be able to get into a rhythm easier. You don't know what you're going to get out of Kristaps Porzingis consistency wise and injury wise. We don't know. Like, he's been a wild card for a lot of his career. But if I had to pick one, I'm going to go with Clippers in 6. I feel like they've made a lot of improvements. They got rid of Doc Rivers and they brought in Tyronn Lue. And while I don't think he's like necessarily the hugest upgrade, he does bring in a better culture. And I feel like he's more prone to adjustments than Doc Rivers is. They brought in Serge Ibaka instead of Montrezl Harrell, and Serge Ibaka won't get played off of the floor. He can still space the floor, and he can still be a solid defender. They brought in Rajon Rondo, and we all know that in the playoffs, Rajon Rondo turns it up, but also even in the regular season, he's been very good for them. So I feel like those additions especially will be great for them, and I feel like it will help them go way farther than they did last year. And we all know that most likely Kawhi is going to be Kawhi in the playoffs. He's been historically great besides that one series against the Nuggets, and not even the whole series per se, just the game 7 where they blew the 3-1 lead. And for the Mavericks, I just don't feel like they have enough pieces. I feel like it's just going to be a Luka show again. Now, although I do think he'll shine, I just don't think, especially with the inconsistency of Kristaps Porzingis, I don't think they'll be able to pull through. So I'm going to go with Clippers in about 6 games. It might be 5 if depending on how much the Clippers turn it up. Now that we got all the first round stuff out of the way, let's get to the second round, and we're going to be starting with the first seeded Jazz against the fourth seeded Clippers in the second round. And I'm going to go with the Clippers in 6 here because it comes down to two things for me. One, the possibility of Rudy Gobert being taken out of the series. He can be very valuable, but we've also seen times where he's been rendered pretty much useless due to the offensive talent on the other side. And the Clippers do have two players in Kawhi and Paul George that if they run their offense correctly, they can do that to Rudy Gobert. Also with Ibaka, if they play him at the center position, which they most likely will, with his spacing standing on the three-point line, that could also be a threat for Rudy Gobert being taken out of the series. And also, the Jazz just don't have the star power for me to have them going to the Western Conference Finals or beating a team with two stars/superstars like Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, or like if a healthy Anthony Davis and LeBron James were there. I just don't think, although Donovan Mitchell will be amazing, I just don't think that as a whole the team will be enough without that second star/superstar type guy to beat some of these duo-led teams. So I'm going to go with Clippers in 6, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Jazz pulled off a 2004 Pistons run where they don't have a superstar, but they still make it to the finals. I wouldn't be surprised if that happened. But I'm going to go with the Clippers. Now let's talk about the 2-seeded Suns versus the 3-seeded Nuggets. And this is a very interesting series to me. I think this will be a great series. But this is where the loss of Jamal Murray really starts to factor in. Because in the first round, when you're playing someone like the Trailblazers, I don't think that it'll matter too much as far as the outcome of the series. Like, obviously, they'll miss him, but I think they have enough talent on their team to pull through with that series pretty easily. But with something like the Suns, where they have a Chris Paul, a Devin Booker, and a DeAndre Ayton and a bunch of good role players, I'm not sure if they're going to pull it out. So I'm going to go with Suns, and I think they'll be able to do it in about 5 or 6 games. All the positives, like I said before, about the Suns, about Chris Paul, Devin Booker translating to the playoffs, all the great role players they have to play big or small, and Jokic, again, is going to do his thing. Michael Porter Jr., I believe, will do his thing. As far as the talent level, I just think that the Nuggets don't have as much depth. They have a lot more consistencies, like with Will Barton, like even with the Paul Millsap on the offensive end, even though I think he'll be good. And I just think that the Suns are an overall more talented team, can translate better to the playoffs. And without Jamal Murray on the Nuggets, they're going to be missing that huge scoring punch that might be the turning factor against a great team like the Suns. So I'm going to go with the Suns in about 5 or 6 games. And finally, we're going to talk about the Western Conference Finals, which I believe will be the 4-seeded Clippers versus the 2-seeded Suns. And although I do think this will be a 7-game series and a very good and competitive close series, I'm going to pick the Clippers to edge this one out in 7. One of the main reasons being, like I said with the Jazz, same thing applies to the Suns. Serge Ibaka being on the perimeter can limit DeAndre Ayton's rim protecting abilities because they are amazing. He's been amazing on defense this year, but I feel like Serge Ibaka can kind of limit that with his floor spacing. And also on offense, DeAndre Ayton has been very inconsistent throughout his career. I'm not sure if that will change this year in the playoffs because when he is aggressive, he can be very good. He has a lot of moves in the post. He can be a very dominant offensive player. But most of the time, he's not aggressive. And when that happens, he's pretty much a non-factor. Although he'll get some open opportunities from Chris Paul and Devin Booker creating, I just don't think when you're going up against a team like the Clippers or like a healthy Lakers or like one of these contending teams, you're going to need all of the offensive punch that you can get. And with DeAndre Ayton not being much of a factor, at least I don't think he will be, I think that the Clippers will be able to edge this one out. Also, with them having arguably the two best players in the series, you can argue between Paul George and Chris Paul. I might slightly prefer Chris Paul, but when you have a top 5 player like Kawhi Leonard, and if Paul George can play well, Rajon Rondo is an experienced playoff veteran, Serge Ibaka an experienced playoff veteran, both of them have championships, and you're going up against a much younger team who is also very good, but they have pieces like Devin Booker. Although I think he'll be good in the playoffs, he's still very young, so he's kind of a wild card. We don't know what we'll get from him. Someone like Cameron Johnson, who's very young, we don't know what we'll get from him. Someone like a Cameron Payne, even, although I say he's a very good backup point guard, you might not get what you need from your role players because a lot of them are very young and inexperienced, besides someone like Chris Paul or Jay Crowder. So in the end, I'm going to go with the Clippers to make the NBA Finals out of the West. But you tell me if you agree with me, you tell me if you disagree, leave it down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. Follow me on all my socials down in the description, Twitch, Twitter, all of that. And that's it. I'm out. Peace.